actual men here, like 3 or 4 of us anyway. People very interested in learning all about the windows and what went into it, and this has been such a blessing in our ministry here at Westchester Lutheran. It is something that frames our church, frames our ministry. It gives context to everything that we do here. I can't think about my wedding, which was 1978, without remembering the pictures of us with the window in the background. It really is, it made it a beautiful day. It was already a beautiful day, but that enhanced everything. I'm in trouble, aren't I? Okay, so, all right. But I'm very happy to introduce Mr. David Judson, who is the CEO, president of Judson Studios, and he has a lot to share with us. So welcome and thank you so much.
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here. My name's, as Pastor said, David Judson, and I'm 5th generation of Judsons that's been working at Judson Studios. And this is a kind of a special place for me. I love this window. And so I want to talk a little bit about the history of Judson and Judson Studios and give you an idea of kind of how our company started, how we came to Los Angeles. I think there's something kind of interesting to, we're such a diverse kind of large city, and we have all of these amazing little places throughout the city. And so I want to kind of talk a little bit about how Judson got here, how we got involved with stained glass, and kind of eventually kind of ending up on your window. This is I published a book back in 2020 on Judson Studios, and our kind of launch party date was I think March 19th, 2020. So you can imagine that party didn't happen. But it was a book that I spent about 4 years working on, and it was something that to me was a way of kind of as a 5th generation owner of a company to kind of recognize my forefathers and kind of create a little bit of a freedom to work in the stained glass industry in the 21st century. Because I think as things change, working in an ancient craft has a lot of challenges with it. And you can imagine paying people to make things with their hands in the city of Los Angeles is tricky sometimes as a business point of view. I joke with my competitors who are in Florida and Nevada. I said they're 10% ahead of me just with the tax basis getting started, and so there's something to be said for that. But there's also Los Angeles is a unique, amazing place. We have very, very talented people, creative people, and I wouldn't change it for anything. So I did come from across town. I came from Pasadena this morning. Our studio is actually based in Highland Park, which is in northeast Los Angeles. And when our company started in 1897, we started in downtown Los Angeles. So you can imagine what downtown Los Angeles was like in 1897. It was a pretty small town. So I'm going to go way back to the very beginning. This is my great-great-grandfather. This is William Lees Judson. And he came to Los Angeles, Pasadena, in 1893. And he was born in Manchester, England, or outside of Manchester, England, and was, as a small boy, kind of exposed to, I think, the repercussions of the Industrial Revolution. Being Manchester was kind of the heart, right, of the Industrial Revolution. And he left. His father left first and came to the States, and then he sent for his family. And William Lees Judson would have been 10 years old when he came to across on a sailboat, basically, to Brooklyn. His family farmed in Brooklyn, if you can imagine, and then ended up in London, Ontario, Canada, because the government was giving property to those that would work the land. And so Judson's father became a farmer and started farming up there. But Judson was more interested in painting. He was a painter. And this is the Arroyo Seco. So if you can imagine Pasadena looking north towards the San Gabriels, that hill on the right-hand side, just on the other side of that, would be now the Rose Bowl. So this is what's called the Holly Street Bridge. It's a very small bridge kind of on the north side of what's called the Arroyo Seco. And the Arroyo Seco is what attracted a lot of artists and creatives because they loved the light. So as a painter, he was known as a plein air painter, which meant he went and just painted in the wherever he could set up, and he would start painting. And so he would capture the light. And so I mention all of this because light and creative and artistic aspects are really kind of what led to the founding of Judson Studios. And so as a painter, he struggled. And he had 6 children. His wife died of complications of the birth of the last child. And so he was feeding his family and trying to stay ahead. And for health reasons, he ended up in Los Angeles. So after in Canada, he found himself in Illinois in 1860, around 1860, when the Civil War broke out. He actually signed up and marched with General Grant all the way down to Tennessee and survived the war, went back to Canada, studied in Europe at the Julian Academy, came back and started teaching in Canada, university level art. And so when he came to Los Angeles, he was one of the few painters who was actually capable of teaching at the university level. That's his home on the left-hand side over there, as you can see. And there's an early article that said in that little tower there was a cot and an easel. So he could get up in the morning and paint until he fell asleep. And he was that type of personality. He's always working. And this was just at that property where that house is, this was his view. So if anybody remembers the red car ran from Long Beach up to Pasadena. And then you see the second track over there, that's the Santa Fe train on the left-hand side, which is really what brought him and many others to Los Angeles at that time. So as I said, as a university professor, he taught art on the university level. There was an art building in downtown Los Angeles, and shortly after that, in 1899 approximately, he built this building. And this is the original School of Fine Arts for USC. So as a professor, as well as a ardent Methodist, if you remember, USC was the Fighting Methodists back in the day. So it was a perfect situation for him to take over. And so USC built the first major School of Fine Arts at the university level. And this is the space, we're still in this space. This is the El Rodeo, the yearbook of 1899. So that's him on the right-hand side with his class. Mostly women, as you can imagine. He also started what was called the Arroyo Guild of Fellow Crafters, and this was a guild of craftspeople. If you know anything about the arts and crafts movement, it started in England and was kind of a reaction to the Industrial Revolution, which is why I mentioned that before, is that as a very young person, he was exposed to this philosophy of the arts and crafts movement. And that's kind of how this idea of making things with your hand, making beautiful things that you live with, this philosophy stuck with him at a very young age. And so they started this guild here in Southern California, and they published this, the Arroyo Craftsman, which is kind of an answer to Gustav Stickley in New York was publishing the Craftsman, which was a fairly larger publication. And they weren't very good publishers. They didn't get past volume 1, number 1. So this is the only one they ever published. But they did exist for a number of years and kind of sold their wares to the community. And the building burned down that I showed you earlier in 1910, and this was the building that was rebuilt. And this was done by the architects Train and Williams, who, if you know Angel's Flight in downtown Los Angeles, that was also done by Train and Williams. And they also did a lot of large kind of arts and crafts homes and some smaller commercial buildings. The school grew. The gender didn't, still women. And supposedly this was the acceptable subject matter at the university level for women to study. It was the fine arts. And so they grew the school. This is, I'm guessing, around 1911. And then in 1920, USC moved from this building to the main campus where it is now in downtown. and Judson Studios moved into this building. And so Judson started the company with his three sons. His three sons, he brought them over in 1895. So when he came in 1893, William Lee sent for his sons in 1895, and they came and were really in earnest, started the company. But we attribute it to William Lee's because he got the company started. He did a lot of their early design work and really kind of got them going in something that was creative, but also practical. So stained glass at that time was very prolific. You know, you'd find it in homes. You'd find it obviously in churches, in commercial buildings. It was a very kind of prolific medium that was used in all different kinds of buildings. And with Los Angeles booming, with the Santa Fe train coming in, this was really a good kind of business niche that they wanted to step into. Their earliest commission that we've seen, that we know, in 1897 was in this building. So if you know Pasadena at all, this building used to be on Orange Grove, if you can imagine, where the parade route goes. And this was the Phineas Mansion. Now, the Phineas Mansion that we know today is the Pasadena Museum of History, if you've ever been there. And that was also Mrs. Phineas's mansion. And unfortunately, this burned down. But the museum came to us when I was actually researching the book and showed us these photos and shared these with us with some correspondence between Judson and the architect and Miss Phineas. I don't think the peacock's real, but it's kind of a nice touch, right? And this is it looking up. It's a very, very interesting window. Also, early arts and crafts. This was a window that was made for the Abbey San Encino, which is very close to our studio, for a man named Clyde Brown. You see the CB in the bottom right there. Clyde Brown was a printer, did a lot of printing for Occidental College, which was an early college there in that area in northeast Los Angeles. And this was kind of the missionary kind of early mission kind of philosophy and kind of history and kind of ideological period that they came to really kind of want to connect with. And so this window was done in exchange for some printing materials, so they traded. If you've been in the Natural History Museum downtown, this dome was done in 1914. We also restored this in the early 2000s, and it's a beautiful space. If you haven't been in the rotunda there, it's worth a trip to go see this space. Because this used to be the Fine Arts Building. So before LACMA and the museum, this is where all the fine arts would be displayed in Los Angeles. And the Central Library, if you haven't been to the Central Library, this is an amazing space. And all of these murals. This globe was done, you see 1926, with the architect Goodhue, a very well-known East Coast architect. This is the signs of the zodiac around it, done by Lee Laurie, who also did, if you know Atlas Shrugged in Rockefeller Center, this is the same artist who did that. So he did that here. And then an early window. I love this picture. These cars are great to see. This is All Saints Episcopal Church in Pasadena. And I show this window. This looks like, anybody know what this color? It looks like a Tiffany window, right? If you know Louis Comfort Tiffany and his work. The artist who did a lot of Tiffany's work came to California and started working at Judson Studios. And so what's really interesting is that this church has Tiffany windows and Judson windows done by the same artist. So apparently he came out in December in the mid-1920s, and he said, why am I not living here? And so he sent for his family. And I think that happened to a lot of people coming out in December. We work with Frank Lloyd Wright at both the Hollyhock House. We did these windows originally and also restored them. And if you haven't been to the Hollyhock House, it's worth a visit. They've completely restored the living room, kind of this area that you're seeing in this picture. This is the dining room. And then up on the hill, you can also see the Ennis House, which is another house that Judson did the glass for. We don't know exactly who designed these or who made these. Who came up with the final designs because Frank Lloyd Wright and his son had both been fired from this project before Judson did the glass. So Mrs. Innes apparently was a very strong personality. And with our reputation restoring those, we got the opportunity to restore this project. This is Unity Temple in Chicago, also Frank Lloyd Wright building, where we removed all of the windows. This temple went through a complete restoration. If you've been to the Chicago area, this is worth a visit to go see the neighborhood where Frank Lloyd Wright worked. And the Unity Temple has been completely restored. We sent a crew to remove all of the windows. You can see the crates there sitting in front of our building as we tried to kind of manage those. They were all completely taken apart, meaning all of the came and the Frank Lloyd Wright used zinc rather than lead to hold his glass together, so we removed all of that, cleaned all of the windows. A lot of the glass that had been poorly matched over the years, we had custom made to replicate the original, and we replaced it and remade these windows. It took us a couple of years, actually. And because Frank Lloyd Wright used so much clear glass, it was very difficult to clean. So it was, I always take a picture of this to remind myself of the meticulousness of everything that it took. But it's a really beautiful space. And next door, there's skylights, and there's what they call a school next door. And it's just a really beautiful spaces. The windows are at the top there, in between the columns at night. And a little closer home, a little bit later in the 70s, this is the Jewel Court in Costa Mesa. If anybody's been down there, it's still there, believe it or not, and they still love it. And then a little bit later, this is kind of when I started getting in the 90s, we made this kind of interesting fountain with a company called Wet Design. They did the fountains at Bellagio, if you've seen that big Bellagio fountain. And I had been playing around with some scrap glass, actually glass like this faceted glass. We would have cutoffs, and they were really beautiful, and I thought, gosh, we should do something with those. So I started tumbling them. I put them in a tumbler. So if you've ever seen sea glass, you know sea glass, it's really beautiful. It's just been tumbled, it's soft. And then I put it in a kiln to heat it up and what we'd say fire polish it, so it would become very smooth and shiny. And Wet Design called one day and said, you know, hey, we're doing this project, and we'd like some colors that we would like to put this glass aggregate, almost like glass stones, in the bottom of our fountain. I said, yeah, I can do that. So I had a little kiln at the time. I threw some of these tumblepitas, cut-offs of these pieces into the kiln and took it to them, and they said, oh, this is amazing. We want 40,000 pounds of it. So I got myself into a pickle. But we did it and shipped them off, and unfortunately, this is called the Burj Al Arab Hotel. So this, you can see kind of two escalators going up at the top on either side of the fountain. And then they had to cover the glass over with some kind of netting because people were taking the glass. And it's really great the way they put on the lights on it. And I should have also, unfortunately, this was recently has been damaged in that conflict that's going on at the moment. So a big project I did here in Los Angeles, the Our Savior Catholic Parish at the university at USC. So this is a new building, and we designed 8 of these large windows. You can kind of see how big they are, based on the Beatitudes. So we took a story from the Old Testament and a story from the New Testament, and kind of designed them to be kind of interactive or teaching tools, like your window here, to students, right? So this idea of like thinking about students in a time when they're kind of really thinking about their faith and how they're actively living through their faith. The Beatitudes were a great kind of interpretation of that. And this was a several-year project. And this is the rose window that's there. And we did this with the flowers. If you see the flowers, they kind of have multiple colors. And that was a new technique that we were starting to explore with called fusing. And that led to a very large project. This is the Church of the Resurrection in Leawood, Kansas. And we used fused glass to create this, which was a way of taking different colors of glass and fusing them together. So traditional glass, you can't do that. You can't take different colors of glass and fuse them together because they stress each other out. And so with this company created glass that we can fuse, and it's very painterly, so it allows us to create a lot of different effects, which to me I think kind of is like a way of combining traditional stained glass with the faceted glass that you guys have here. And that's led us to working with more contemporary artists. So I mentioned that when we started this fusing, we had to build another facility. So now we have a second facility that we do. And we wanted to be able to open this facility up for other artists and other people to come work in glass. Because working in glass is very difficult, right? It's kind of a niche thing. And so we wanted to create a facility where artists, primarily painters, could come and work with us. And this is an artist that we had worked with on several different projects. He's Los Angeles based, and he's kind of comes out of the comic book fantastical world. And he started with smaller projects and then ended up creating this project, which is this is the structure for it. And it's just kind of interesting. I like to show and talk about it, about how stained glass is still alive and still evolving and still, creating new ways of evolving and working with different artists. So you'll be able to walk into this kind of almost like a dome. It's like a geodesic dome almost. And so the art glass will be attached to this glass that you're seeing here. And all of this glass is structural glass. So what's kind of interesting about it is that the glass itself, the edge, it's held in place by compression. So there's no steel holding it in place. So glass is this really amazing material that can be used both structurally and in terms of decoratively. And so this, we had a lot of engineers help us design and apply. Now the artist's artwork will be applied to this structure, and you'll be able to walk inside of it. So if you can imagine like this dome of light that you'll be able to experience from within. Looks familiar, right? So I wanted to show this, and before I get into your window, I want to show you one more project, and then we'll talk a little bit more about your window. This, I don't know if anybody's heard the story, but when I was doing the book in 2020, maybe it was probably been a couple years before, we couldn't get the screen up to take a photograph of the window. But I wanted this window in my book. This is really, I think, one of 3 faceted projects that I have in the book. And so we got a picture up of this area, which you can see over here. And so we were able to use that. And I'll talk a little bit more about it. But one of the things I wanted to talk about, and this is also a page in the book, and this is about the process. So I don't know if any of you kind of know how these windows are made, but the Dalle de Verre technique that you have here was kind of at its peak when this window was made. And it was a technique that was invented in France in the late 20s, early 30s, and then came to the United States after the war. So after the war, with the kind of boom of suburbs and growing churches like this one, faceted glass kind of fit in with that the nature of the architecture that these buildings were being built in. And so what we do, if you know like traditional stained glass that you see in cathedrals, it's hand cut, painted, and then put together with lead, right? Lead canes. And then it's very thin. It's about 1/8 of an inch. The lead's about 1/4 of an inch thick. This glass, faceted glass, comes in what we call a dalle, which just means like a brick. It's the French term, Dalle de Verre. And we call it here faceted glass. And so the Dalle de Verre basically comes in about almost an inch thick piece of glass by about the size of a sheet of paper. And so what we do is we take the drawing. You see the upper left hand, the black and white drawing is laid out on the table, and the glass is cut to set on this design. And so you can see him kind of in the back of that upper left-hand photo, he's actually on a tile saw. So if you know a tile saw, it's like a wet a blade, a rotary blade with diamonds on the edge of it. And we can use that to cut this thick glass. And on the right-hand side, he's cutting by hand. So we use a glass cutter to score on the surface of the glass, and he could either break that on an anvil, or he would put it on the tile saw and just cut along the line that he made with the glass cutter. And then on the very bottom left, in the middle photo on the left is laying out all the glass. And what we do is, as it's laid out, you hit the edge of the glass with a hammer, and that creates the facets in the glass. So if you notice, on the edges of the glass, there's these little facets that play with the light. And that's the whole concept, is like to create this jewel-like effect in the glass. And sometimes it may be chipped a little too deep, and so they have to put kind of putty on it to protect it for when we're pouring the epoxy, which is what they're doing in the bottom right-hand corner. So they've laid it out on the drawing, they put stops around it, the exact size, right? Because when we show up here at the church, we have to make sure it fits in the opening. And then we lay a bed of sand down, and then in between the glass, and then we pour epoxy. So it's like a two-part epoxy, which is hardens basically overnight. So we mix that epoxy, we pour it in between all the glass, we put sand on top of it, which is what he's doing on the bottom left-hand side. So it's just taking a Folgers can and poking holes all through the bottom of it, picking up sand, and then shaking the sand on top of the epoxy. And that gives it kind of that nice finish that you see on the black or the negative space here. And so that's kind of how the process of making these windows are. So if you allow me, I have one more kind of project that I want to share. It's a little bit related because this project was happening at about the same time this project was. And this is a project we're restoring. This is the cadet chapel at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. And my grandfather did this project originally in 1960 and worked closely with the architects at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, famous architectural firm out of Chicago. And this is what it looks like during the day, which is the concept of like an ancient cathedral with these kind of spires. It almost looks like jets, right? Or jet wings on end. And then this is what it looks like at night. So from the inside, the glass kind of runs almost like these, runs kind of through these, all the way up to the roof, which is about a little over 100 feet high. Beautiful space. This is the Protestant chapel, which is upstairs, and then below that, underneath this chapel, is the Catholic chapel. And so this is the construction of it being built. And again, if you can imagine, in 1960, this was really something. This is looking up, so those openings that you see, those kind of ribs, that's where our glass was going to go. And then the glass was set in between these other openings. You can kind of see almost very similar to what you have here. I love that car. Everybody see that? Recognize that car out there? And these were made a little bit differently than yours. So rather than using epoxy, they just used aluminum, which was, they call them aluminum cassettes. So rather than setting them, because they were all rectangular in shape, you can see the black kind of dark areas there. That's the glass that's kind of standing on end. And these were custom made. They're a little bit smaller, and they had a special lip designed on them. And then they used this kind of foam tape. You can see she's putting foam tape in the area to receive the panels. And then they would use this material that was a fancy new material from a new company in Minneapolis called 3M. This is new products. They were very proud to be using these products. So that material would go down, and they would put a secondary piece of metal to hold them in place. And one of the important things, when we went to go restore this, imagine almost 2,400 panels that were made to make up this project, almost 30,000 pieces of glass. And so one of the challenges we had when they wanted us to remove everything was how to keep track of it. And so luckily, when we went into the files, we found the numbering system that my grandfather used originally. And so you can see here, it's kind of fun, you see the number there that they used on the edge of the panels. So each panel had been labeled and was still on there. So we were able to reuse that labeling system. You can kind of see it here, it's a little washed out. But we took that and we created our own system. And now we have, there's hundreds of crates. We just reinstalled the first section last month, and next month we'll go in and install probably a couple hundred more. So it's just now, we removed them in 2021, and they're just getting back to be reinstalled right now. Because unfortunately, when they started restoring the building, here you can see them prepping for it. You see all the big cranes, and you see there's a structure on the left-hand side coming up around it. They had to completely encase the entire building, because if you know Colorado Springs, it's a beautiful space, but the winds come down the mountains that would have blown anybody on high-reach equipment. There's no way you could have worked on the structure. Filled it with scaffolding, entire scaffolding all the way up to the ceiling. We were one of the first ones in. This is the very top, to a point. We had to go in and put a label on every single panel to identify it before it could be removed. And we had to document them, so any breakage or anything like that, completely documented, and then go ahead and start removing them. And here you can see the high reach access accessible in the exterior in that big encasement. We had to find storage for these. So you can imagine. Oh, where is that crate? Yeah, that crate's somewhere in here. We documented all of them, so if you see the very top ones, so very almost like your windows, you see the very top, they're black. So over the years, almost every decade, they would go in and put sealants on it because the building leaked from day one. And I have a lot of correspondence with my grandfather saying, hey, your windows leak. He said, no, it's not my windows. We water tested, we did everything we could. Luckily, my grandfather was a lawyer and kept very good records. And so he was able to cover himself. And what they found out eventually was that there was an internal gutter system that had been value engineered out. So they removed a gutter system and the building just leaked from day one. The other thing that really extended it was they found asbestos. And they found asbestos actually on these windows from the sealants that had been used. And so an abatement contractor had to come in to help us remove the windows. And then when we got the windows to our studio, we had to completely suit up. So everything we had to build a containment space and to be removing all the sealants that they had put on. The glass itself was in very good condition. So somebody had mentioned, I forgot who it was, about how great condition your windows are in. And these windows are very durable over time. And so that's the great thing. So it really wasn't the glass, it was really cleaning them from sealants. And then we had to add a new sealant, and now our crew is going back to reinstall them. I show this picture, you can kind of see a before and then an after of the entire building basically being taken apart and reassembled. And here we are getting ready to install. So you can see it's a little bit of a precarious process. And this is our installation team. They're there relieved that they're done with that phase, ready to come home. So anyway, that's just a little bit of our history and story, and I wanted to share that with you all. And I appreciate you all coming. I do want to talk a little bit about your window and field any questions anybody has. I noticed that you have this, which is great. I don't know if everybody's seen this or spent any time with it, but this is a great document. And what I love about this window is a couple things. One is, as I said, this is one of the very few faceted windows that I've included in the book, because you can imagine 100 years of projects to try and get into a book was very difficult to select which ones it was. And I think this window is one of our earliest. So this is one of the earliest Judson faceted glass windows here in Los Angeles. And can we raise the screen? Yeah, we can turn that on. And what I love about this is that it's representative of what stained glass is and what it does when it's at its best. And it's really about telling a story, being a narrative story, and all the symbolism and things that you see. If you're here on Sunday, you may see one thing or something new, right? There's always something new that appears. And what I love about this is the idea, too, is that it's an eye. So I don't know if that's in there or not, but this is just a great big eye, right? Which is the idea of the eye of God, and with the Holy Spirit, right, as the pupil in the middle. And so this whole composition, to me, I think is genius. And working with the pastor at this time, who was the pastor? Who knew the pastor? Anderson. Worked with my father, or would have been probably my grandfather, and Herb Meinke, who is a great German designer at Judson at the time, to come up with this Apostles' Creed and all the symbols that go with it. And my father was amazing also about knowing all the symbols and what they all represented. But the idea that all of these, symbols can stand on their own, but also work as a cohesive whole, right? And this is really the Apostles' Creed is kind of the epitome of, as Christians, how we live and the things that we follow and believe in. And the way the flames, right, the 7 flames of the Pentecost mixed in, also fantastic. And the other great thing aesthetically, which I think is so good with faceted glass, is the fact that it takes advantage of the negative space, right? So it's this idea that it doesn't need to all be glass. Sometimes having no glass makes the effect better. And I think this is one of the best examples of using negative space to kind of bring the whole composition together, as well as have individual things. So if I remember, it's a little over 40 feet by over 20 feet, and I believe there's 42 panels that were put together. So each of these panels would have been made individually, like I showed you in the black and white photos, and then assembled here on site when it was done. And then I love the way the colors kind of continue throughout the whole back of the church like this. But, and I can get in more into the symbols and that kind of thing here, but I'd also like to open it up to questions if anybody has any questions about Judson and we do. Yes, sir.
From start to finish, creation to manufacture to installation, how long did that take?
For this project? That's a good question, and I'd have to go back and look at the file exactly, but my guess is that it probably would have been close to 2 years working on this. And so a lot of that is spent in design time. So working with the pastor and kind of working through the designs and the details, that's all done on an inch. Basically, it would have been done on with a watercolor and drawn on paper at about an inch to foot scale. So it would have been a 40-inch drawing. And I wasn't able to find it before my talk here, but I think that sketch is in our studio still. And so that would have been sketched out, changes made, and then it would have gone to the full-size drawing, the black and white drawings that I showed you in that photo. And those black and white drawings then are how it's translated from concept to actual glass. Yeah. And that's if we have all the glass in stock. Getting the glass. So this glass is probably what's called Blanco glass. So Blanco is a fairly important glass company out of Milton, West Virginia, of all places. Has anybody been to West Virginia? Yeah? There's not much there. So the reason that Blanco ended up there is that they had a lot of gas, a lot of natural gas. So you can imagine making glass requires heat. And so they put this glass is basically sand. So it's sand and silica mixed up with the mineral oxides, and that's what brings the color in. So like reds are selenium, blues are generally cobalt, greens and reds, both, interestingly, are like copper. And so these mineral oxides mixed in with the sand and silica, heated up until it's like molten, like honey almost, and then they dump them into molds to get the dowels, like I was telling you. And then they run through a big annealing oven, which they call a leer. And so once they dump that molten glass into the shapes, into the molds, they run through about a 120-foot oven that's getting cooler every section that it goes through. And it takes about an hour to get through. because if they don't cool the glass off slowly, it gets a lot of tension. And so when you go to cut it, it'll just break into a million pieces. And so that process in itself is really pretty amazing. And Blanco, I don't know that they make dowels anymore. There's a couple other companies that are making the dowels. But the dowel de verre process is very limited right now. We still have dowels in our inventory at the studio, but dowel de verre windows are not really being made today. And partly because a lot of the firms that worked on the East Coast used like concrete or cement rather than epoxy. We always used epoxy. And we use the epoxy because it's a little more flexible, right? In California, you have to prepare for seismic events, right? Whereas in the East Coast, they would just use concrete, and when concrete cracks and water starts penetrating, that's it. You know, you can't really do anything. And so to remove the glass from that matrix of material, basically you lose all the glass and you have to rebuild it. With epoxy, we have a little bit more flexibility. We have been able to do some repairs and that kind of thing with some loss of glass. So this period from like 1950s, early 1950s to the late 1980s is kind of when this technique was kind of at its peak. Yeah. Yes?
It's really, really hot when you're up close. Is that because of the epoxy?
The heat?
Yeah. My husband stands up there and he's sweating under that robe.
Yeah. Well, sorry? Fake candles. They're melted, yeah. Yeah, glass is not the best insulator, at least colored glass. And so that heat, because this is south-facing, correct? So it's taking sun all day. So it's just taking sun all day, and that heat is just building up on the surface and then kind of passes through. From the glass, yeah. The epoxy as well, but glass can be a good conductor. So there are ways of cooling it off. So now most of our installations have like exterior glass outside of them with like an IG, what we call an IG unit, which is an insulated glass unit. And so that helps, that's two pieces of clear glass that are separated by about 1/4 of an inch. And they're filled, that space in between those pieces is filled with argon. And what that does is help create insulation in a way for the glass. And so that could be a possibility at some point if it's a problem. But being on the south side, it's just taking sun all day, yeah. And it doesn't get a break from just absorbing all of that heat. And so that is an issue. One of the things to keep an eye on is that with that heat, the epoxy and the glass have different points of expansion and contraction based on the temperature that they're at. And so that's what we liked about the epoxies. It can kind of expand and contract without separating from the glass. And so there are some kind of longevity questions there at some point, but looks like it was made pretty well. Yeah, yes, sir.
On your black negative space, it looks like stained glass is painted.
Yeah.
Is that put in for structural?
No, that's a really good question. I saw that and I don't know myself, to be honest with you. And it could be a question of breaking up the epoxy so that it's not just epoxy, that there is still some glass there. And that could be just like I was saying about that point of expansion and contraction. That might help that, of just having glass, the black glass interspersed in those areas. That's a good question, because I had the same question myself when I came in to look at it, because I don't think I've seen that used before. But I think it did help with the amount of epoxy that you want without any glass exposed. Yeah. Yes.
When did the artistic creativity for stained glass start in history?
Stained glass starts kind of with the year 1000, approximately. So it's really architecture that leads to it. So if you think, at least in Western culture, with religious buildings starting in kind of the Romanesque period. And if you think about Romanesque, they have kind of very curved arches, very thick. Everything's really thick because because the building is supporting its own weight. And so around 1,000, 1,100, you start seeing the great cathedrals of Europe. And those become really where we see stained glass taking off, because what they're doing is they've created the flying buttress, right? And the flying buttress is basically a way of supporting the weight of the walls on one element that could just come out. So that's why you see all those armatures coming out of cathedrals, is that those are load-bearing. And so that allowed them to open up the walls and start introducing stained glass. And stained glass goes back to the Egyptians and the Romans, and even in the Middle East, you start seeing it being used as windows. And that's actually very similar to the technique that is here. This has more in common with the most original idea of windows in art glass than traditional, what we think of as stained glass or leaded glass. And so this was kind of the concept of the way they would have done, at least in the Middle East, windows. And then the introduction of stained glass comes with this kind of evolution of architecture, and what they started doing was painting on the glass. So all of these details of faces, and that's paint that goes on the glass. And it's a vitreous paint, so it's basically ground up glass and different minerals that are brushed onto the surface of the glass to create negative space. And then that gets fired into the glass, and it becomes permanent. That's how that kind of the idea of figurative elements come into stained glass. It's through that painting process. Yes?
I may have missed this, but is there any other church in Los Angeles or Southern California or anywhere in the world that has the stained glass, an entire wall like this is? This is amazing.
Yeah.
Is there any other place that has something like this?
Not this large. Not in Los Angeles. There are very large installations of faceted glass back east, but this is one of the largest, not only one of the largest single kind of shapes of stained glass, but of faceted glass. Yeah, this is probably one of the largest in Southern California. Yeah. Yes?
So for all the different colors, they matched it to the painting that they made first, right? And then do they order the colors?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good question. So we keep an inventory. There's a great shot that we take it. People take at the studio. They love the shot of the samples of this glass in the window, in a window. So we keep about this glass we don't keep as much as we used to, but we have probably 40 or 50 colors that would have been kept in inventory. So we would buy it they would come in boxes. You'd buy 10 at a time, the dowels, and you'd keep those in inventory. But yes, that's the idea, is that you would take the colored sketch and you would match it with a color. And so if we didn't have the color in inventory, we generally had, the manufacturers had 100 colors that we had their samples of, and we would match that with a sample, and it would be a number. So we would say, okay, when you're coloring the sketch to the full size, you would write the number down. And so Judson we have our own number, and then the manufacturer has their number. And so if we don't have it, we'd call the supplier, and they would ship the glass, and we would work from there. Yeah. In our flat glass, in our inventory right now, we have about 600 different colors of sheet glass. Yeah. So, yes.
Thank you so much. This was such a great presentation. My question is, what do you see like changes or integration with different technology for like the 22nd century of this craft?
Yeah. That's a great question too. And did everybody hear that? So what do we? How have we incorporated technology into our process and what we do, and kind of moving into the 21st century? And that has been kind of like one of the biggest questions that I've had to deal with myself. And I have embraced technology my whole life. For some reason, I've always loved technology. I've always been involved with technology. And when I came to the studio in the mid-1990s, the artists were basically retirement age Eastern Europeans that could draw figures, right? Figurative drawing. And I said, well, that's not sustainable. We've got to figure out how to get young people involved. And so one of the things I did was I started an art gallery. And we did art shows at the studio to have it was just paintings. It had anything to do with glass, but I wanted the art community to see who we are, what we did. And so if they came in and said, I've never knew this place existed, I'd realize, okay, that's this is working. And so we were able to attract younger people to what we did. And the younger people are a little bit more tech savvy. And so that project that I showed you at the Caruso Center, the Beatitudes windows, was the first time that we really just completely moved from the watercolor sketches to doing everything in the computer. And so what we did is we moved to the tablets. You see, you can actually draw on a tablet and draw into the computer. And so we had our artists working on these tablets, drawing directly into the computer. And what we would do is draw the designs to scale of the frame. So if we had the frame size, then we could create the full-size cartoons from that computer-generated drawing as well. So we were able to do both the sketches and the full sizes in the computer because we wanted to collapse that time as much as possible to spend as much time on the actual fabrication of the piece, right? The piece that ends up in the actual space that it's going to be used. And so technology in that regard has been a huge factor for us because all of those full-size drawings, you know, like the ones in the Catholic, we started doing that on the wall, and it's, you know, almost 30 feet high. And so these guys are on the ladder drawing. I said, okay, we've got to figure this out. There's no way we're going to be able to do this. And the other cool thing is that because of all those figures, we posed the people. We went up to Hollywood. In Hollywood, about once a year, the studios have a big yard sale basically and sell all these costumes. So we were able to get kind of costumes that we could use to then pose people. So we would get our artists, anybody we could get to pose into the kind of sketches that we had made, digitally photograph them, and then put that digital photograph into the drawing and draw directly on there. And what was great about that is that, you know, if you think about the folds in a garment and the shadows and all that kind of stuff, we could mock all that up before we photographed it. And then that was much easier for the artist to create in the hand drawing, and then the painters to then paint on the glass. So that's kind of been one of the biggest things is this, in the introduction of the computer of that. The other thing is the fused glass that I showed you and the technology of fusing colored glasses together. That didn't exist until the 1980s. That's one of the newest technologies in art class and stained glass is the ability to get colored glasses to mix and remain stable. And so that for us has been a real kind of opened us up to all different kinds of processes and working, like I said, collaborating with other artists who wouldn't have worked in glass otherwise. Because what they also do, the company that makes it is out of Portland, Oregon. So when I started in the 1990s, a lot of our American artists were going to Germany primarily to get their contemporary glass done. And I thought, well, being in Los Angeles, that to me was very like, we're cutting edge. We're in Los Angeles, we should be doing kind of the cutting edge of art glass. But we were known as one of the most traditional studios here in Los Angeles. And because what happened after the war was all these stained glass windows were destroyed in Europe. And when they went to go remake the windows, they didn't want to recreate medieval windows. They wanted to create something kind of new. And so all of that kind of stained glass went in that direction, whereas here was the opposite. All of our people came back from Europe and they saw these beautiful windows and they wanted to reproduce that here. And so we did a lot of neo-Gothic work after the war up until probably the 1970s. And so the fusing, when we had that project in Kansas City, we were competing with an American artist working with a German firm. And so we had to figure out how we could kind of do something more contemporary without doing the same thing they were doing, because there was 3 major studios doing it. They were all competitive, have been doing it for 40, 50 years. You can't compete with that, right? So this idea of working with the studio out of Portland, Oregon was the great solution for us. And I loved it because it was like a West Coast story, right? It's like, being able to work on the West Coast and do something that was kind of something that nobody else was doing. And we're still the only major studio doing it. And so it's a really kind of exciting thing for us to see where it takes us, and it allows us to really incorporate more technology. Yes?
A number of the pieces of stained glass are more than one color.
Yes.
And so how do you create that?
Yeah, so you see that primarily in kind of the red, oranges, these here. Do you see it in some of these? Yeah, it's kind of the reds and oranges, right? A little bit lighter. Yeah, and I think that's from the faceting. So when you hit the edge with the hammer, it's removing some of the glass. That's why we call it facet. It's creating facets in the glass. And so it looks lighter because it's thinner. So there's not as much glass there, and so it looks a little bit lighter. The oranges and yellows are a little bit different because they do what we call strike. They strike when they cool. So when they dump that into like that mold to get the shape of the rectangle, when they're making the glass, the edges cool quicker than the center. And so that's why they go a little bit lighter on the red. And that's why it's taking, we take advantage of that where, it looks like flames and fire. And so it's a really great color to work with. But yeah, that's an interesting thought because that is kind of like what led us to this idea of being able to get more than one color in one piece. Yeah. Did I work with my grandfather? No, he had retired. I did know my grandfather, but he retired, and I worked with my father pretty closely. My grandfather moved to San Diego I guess it was one of those things where when he sold it to my father, he didn't want to kind of hover around. So he moved away so that there wasn't this, it was kind of a clean break. And family businesses can be challenging. As you can imagine. Any other questions? Yes.
The design is, the glasswork is amazing, but it's also the art design of it that is just wonderful. And I was wondering if that was a massive collaboration or if it was just a product of one person's vision and incorporating that with the whole side of the church, because this is quite impressive as well with all of the isotropes, the different colors all around, they kind of blend in with that. So I was just curious about the actual artistic design of it all.
Yeah, that's a great question, and the process generally is very collaborative, and especially in this period. And Pastor Anderson, I think you had told me that Pastor Anderson wanted the red. Yeah, this kind of rainbow effect. So he moved the red down, right? So we know Pastor Anderson obviously involved with that. The whole concept of the Apostles' Creed, I don't know where that came from. And I'm not sure if that was Pastor's idea. Could very well have been. But that is some of the kind of what's really great about our files and looking into it is seeing where that original concept came from and then how that gets interpreted into the actual artwork. And it generally is a very collaborative process. So even today, we'll talk about these ideas very early on, and sometimes that's what takes the longest time is coming up with the concept. And then once the concept is developed, there's it's probably Pastor and maybe my father, might have been my father at this time, or it was my father, grandfather. And then sometimes there's a small committee involved. My father always told me to charge the Presbyterians 10% more because you were going to have committee meeting after committee meeting after committee. So, and then it gets handed off, like I mentioned, Herb Meinke was the artist at that time, who was an amazing faceted glass designer. And so he would have been really kind of the vision, like he would have worked on working all the symbolism and the composition, would have been our artist that worked closely with Pastor and Father.
What was his last name?
Meinke.
Meinke.
Yeah, great German guy. Was very good. Worked for my father for many, many years, and my grandfather. Yeah, and we have a lot of his sketch work that this was kind of like his peak, I think. And like I said, I think this is one of his best designs. Because I love the way the symbols are kind of integrated in, both large and small, right? And then grouped together, right? So you've got the boat up here, the butterfly, and the alpha and the omega. And that little cluster over there. And then you've got, like I said, the large eye with symbols within the eye. And then another cluster up here with kind of the star, representing Christ and judgment up there with the scales. This 3, I'm not sure what this one is over here, to be honest. And then the phoenix rising and the flag of the resurrection that you see down here. I loved these. You see the Cairo in the chalice, and then those are 2 peacocks on either side, which I think is also great. Yeah. So these hidden things that you just don't see, and the peacocks represent that new life and resurrection as well. So we have a great library at the studio with all of these iconography books that. It was great when my father was alive because I could just ask him and he would know them off the top of his head, and then when he passed I had to spend more time in the library. But the fact that it's such a great symbol of that and the teaching aspects of it is really, really amazing. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes?
Do you have a family member that's going to take it from you?
I do have a son and a daughter, and my son's now working in the studio. So he's 24, and he's finishing up his degree, but is working in the studio 3 days a week. So I just got back from a business trip, and my wife was saying, you got to talk to Benjamin. His name's Benjamin. You got to talk to Benjamin. He's all stressed out. And I said, yeah, that's the part of the learning process and how to kind of manage all of that. But he really enjoys it. He's having a lot of fun. My daughter, who's a little bit younger, she's up in Santa Cruz right now, and hopefully she'll get involved. But yeah, we've been real lucky in that regard. And I don't know, there's something about a company that lasts. Most people say, companies, it's kind of doesn't get past the second generation and rarely gets past the third generation. And part of it is that I think that when you're in such a niche business, you kind of fall in love with it. And my parents never encouraged me to do this. They encouraged me to do something. I have a brother and a sister as well. We were all encouraged to do something different. And my brother and sister have worked in the company, but I'm the only one now left working in it. But the fact that you kind of go off and you do something else and then bring that back, that's something that you bring back and contribute to what it is. And part of what I was saying about doing the book was kind of like coming to terms with that history as well. It allowed me to recognize my forefathers, but also kind of the freedom to then do kind of what I felt like I wanted to do with the company and move it forward. Because you feel like there's an obligation there to a certain extent. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in that you've been given this great opportunity and this great kind of history, but you also have to bear that to a certain extent. And how do you create new from something that's kind of so rooted in the past? And so that's been a challenge. Yeah. Yes?
This is an absolute piece of artwork. Getting down to business terms, how much would something like this cost?
I thought I was going to get through without having to answer that question. No, we generally price things by the square foot. So faceted glass now, like I said, we don't do much of it anymore. But my guess is that it would probably be somewhere in the realm of probably $700 to $800 a square foot. So you can imagine that would be an expensive window today for sure.
So this is in the neighborhood of $500,000.
Probably, yeah. Yeah, most churches don't realize the value of their windows. And they may have paid, you have to add on zeros now when we go into our files and you see what it is, and that's just simply keeping up with inflation, cost of inflation, everything. Everything's going up pretty drastically, but we're also dealing with something that's handmade, right? There's a certain kind of cost that gets associated with that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's something to be said for art. And yeah, it's a really hard in that regard too as a business. And like, for example, we're competing on projects, and if price is the number one thing, then it's challenging because that's not really the right priority. And it's also up to us to remain. You need to remain competitive and kind of find ways to, because price is always a problem, right? Price is always an option. But at the same time, it's an amazing investment. And like you said, you live with this every day, right? So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and there's projects where you probably know you're not going to win or you don't want to be involved with. Yeah, that's part of that process too. It's a very hard thing to learn, to say no. Yeah. Any other questions? Great, well I really appreciate you all coming today and having me here, and I hope you've learned a little bit about your window. And like I said, Judson Studios gives tours, or if you want to set up a tour for the church, you're welcome to kind of set up a tour and come to the studio. We give public tours once a month. My son Benjamin gives the tour, so you can meet him. And also you can find my book too, with your windows in the book. So if you want to know more about the studio and kind of what we do and that kind of stuff, you can find my book either on our website or on Amazon or wherever. It's kind of a nice thing. We have a little blurb about the window in the book, so it's kind of good and fun. That's why I'm happy to be here and see it. It's been a long time. So thank you very much, everybody.